Now we are so pleased to have our second speaker, Rachel Smith, Chief Executive Officer at Animal Free Science Advocacy. Rachel holds an MSc in Animal Welfare Science, Ethics and Law from the University of Winchester, during which she undertook her dissertation project on freedom of information legislation and animal research. Rachel has been committed to various animal welfare causes since a young age. During her career, she has worked for NGOs in the animal welfare and conservation fields in Europe, Asia, and Australia, as well as employment in the community sector for local, state, and federal government. Lovely to have you with us, Rachel. I'll hand this over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. My former colleague, Adam, was a guest speaker at the webinars. That was about May last year. So I'm going to endeavour to give a bit of an update on what Animal Free Science Advocacy have been doing in the interim period, and also provide a bit of an overview for those who didn't attend the last presentation where Adam was a guest speaker or haven't accessed the recording since. And as per the introduction, I'm the CEO at AFSA. I've been with the organisation since 2019 and really pleased to be here today. So thank you again for having us. And for those who are not familiar with Animal Free Science Advocacy, or AFSA, our vision is a future where no animals are harmed in the name of science, and scientific progress is advanced through animal-free research methods. And how we seek to achieve that mission, we've got a range of different methods. So first and foremost, we're a campaigning organisation, so we run public advocacy campaigns, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later in the presentation. One of our other kind of key functions is to expose what is happening in terms of animal use in research and teaching in Australia, because it's a very untransparent industry. So uncovering what is happening to the public, many of which of the research is funded through our taxes. So trying to expose what is happening. We also seek to engage, so that might be with the media or lawmakers, politicians, the research community, peak bodies, funders, quite extensive in terms of who we'll seek to influence. And we're also a resource for those who are interested in this particular subject. So we have a really extensive range of resources. So that includes reports, our podcast. We also have webinars with guest speakers, case studies, our social media channels. So I will point you in the direction of where some of those resources are, but really quite comprehensive for a range of different people. So it could be for students, for researchers, for members of animal ethics community, for the media. We have particular guidelines on reporting on animal use, so really quite an extensive target in terms of who our resources are aimed at. And I wanted to give a brief overview of the use of animals in research and education in Australia, again, for those who are not so familiar. And it's difficult to have a full picture because, as I mentioned, it's not very transparent. And we don't have a system of national reporting, unlike other jurisdictions. So it's very difficult to say how many animals are used every year, for what purpose, and what outcomes have been achieved, because each state and territory has different requirements as to whether they report that data, how they report it, or in some cases it won't be reported at all. From the information that we can glean, there's approximately 10 million animals used per year in Australia, and it really does vary from year to year. That would be in a kind of an average. That makes Australia one of the world's highest users of animals, but that 10 million average doesn't necessarily mean that it's all invasive research. Some of that may be observational or non-harmful research in terms of conservation based research or environmental research. The species that are used are very broad. Most commonly known would be mice and rats, and fish are used in large quantities, but also farm animals for more agricultural type research, or veterinary drugs, non-human primates, even dogs, cats, and wildlife. Some people are surprised about that, but wildlife have been used, and we have produced some case studies documenting wildlife use. In Australia, there's a code, the Australian Code for the Care and Use of Animals for Scientific Purposes, that each state and territory incorporates into their own legislation to various degrees. That code was last updated fully in 2013, and we just heard yesterday that it will be reviewed this year. So there's definitely a big opportunity to try and strengthen that code. And there are various funders of research. So that includes charities, philanthropy, the universities funding themselves, and significantly government funders. So the main one being the National Health and Medical Research Council, Medical Research Future Fund on the Australian Research Council. So that, as I mentioned before, is taxpayer funded. And obviously, as AFSA's objections to the use of animals in research are for ethical grounds. Those animals, it is not to benefit them individually, and they haven't consented to that research, much of which will be harmful. But we also push back against the scientific necessity of using animals, because you may often be under the mistaken belief that it's a necessary evil, but I think this has been increasingly challenged at many levels, more so overseas than in Australia at this point, but it's beginning to filter through here. And put very simply, the experiments can be harmful not only to the animals, but to humans, in terms of not translating, because of the differences in anatomy, physiology, and metabolism, really means that we can't reliably use the data that's taken from animal research and expect that to be relevant for humans. And we do have a lot more information on our website about this. So in terms of AFSA's current focuses, I'm just going to talk about a few of those briefly. Primate research is one of our key campaigns, and you may be aware that last year we launched our Honour Me With a Name campaign that was really bringing to attention the use of non-human primates in Australia. So in Australia, baboons, macaques, owl monkeys, and marmosets are used in research. A lot of that is kind of basic research, more trying to establish particularly functions of drugs or mechanisms, and it might be related to HIV research, kind of neurological research, some pregnancy-related research, and even xenotransplantation, which is transplanting cells or organs from other species to another species. And in this case, it's been between pigs and baboons. And there are 3 breeding colonies in Australia, in New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria, that are supplying the primates for research. So the big launch last year was really drawing to attention the individual stories of primates that have been used, which was obtained from freedom of information or publications. And we really told the stories of those primates. It gave supporters an opportunity to name those particular primates. And a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is really trying to find out a bit more about recently funded research by the NHMRC, which is proving very difficult. You will hear claims that the research is of the highest standard and only when it's necessary, but if you're trying to obtain the actual information about what that research led to, there's a lot of hurdles to come upon to receive that information. And we're really working along the lines of trying to make it as obstructive as possible to conduct primate research, and we'll be doing a lot more activity on that later this year. So please stay tuned for that. Other areas of focus are funding for non-animal research methods. So really to progress the end, a phase out of animal research, we really need to be showcasing the non-animal research methods and increasing confidence and ability to use those methods. And a lot of other countries that have a high research outputs are investing in non-animal research methods, whereas we don't have extensive funding, or we have no national funding directed to developing and validating non-animal research methods in Australia, or the Centre to validate non-animal research methods as we see overseas. And this was being called for over 40 years in Australia and still hasn't been met. So a lot of our work is direct lobbying or including in our submissions that this needs to be required. a requirement in Australia from the funding bodies. Another focus is in transparency in animal research. As I mentioned previously, there's no national reporting system, and there is a project underway at the moment to try and develop a model for national reporting, but we would like to see additional steps beyond that in terms of how much funding has been allocated to animal versus non-animal research methods, what have been the outcomes of that research, what are the plain language summaries of the research. There is an openness agreement, and some research institutes in Australia have signed up to that, but it's really providing minimal information in terms of a statement of their use of animals, but very little beyond that at this stage anyway. Other focus areas are, we've become a bit more involved in international regulations. So there are particular guidelines that regulate use of animals in chemical testing and for pharmaceutical testing. And Australia implements those guidelines. So we are part of international coalitions of animal welfare groups that seek to try and remove obsolete guidelines or improve the guidelines that reduce or replace animals within those guidelines, and then lobby the relevant bodies in Australia to try and adopt those guidelines as soon as possible. Whilst animal research is continuing, we also have a focus on trying to strengthen that oversight. As I mentioned before, there's a code in Australia, but really the main oversight is institutional animal ethics committees. So an institution that the AEC is approving the research, the animal research that is conducted there. So it doesn't have much input from the state regulators there providing the licenses, but not looking over the specific detail of what's been approved. That's more approved at a localized level. So we work quite heavily, and we're currently working on a report looking at the effectiveness of the animal ethics committees and how that can be improved. And we have a lot of focus on law reform, trying to improve the structure while it's still animal research is still existing. We also provide examples of animal and non-animal research methods. So we have a variety of case studies, either by species or the non-animal research methods. We also have lists of a page where recent Australian research papers are included that have included animals in research, so you can get a feel of what is being conducted in Australia. And we also have papers that are refuting animal experiments and showcasing the potential of non-animal research methods to provide that evidence base. I wanted to quickly mention a recent expose, and thank you to Animal Liberation for sharing this action. It has attracted quite a lot of attention, both in Australia and overseas, quite rightly, because it was some absolutely horrific research that was approved by an animal ethics committee in Victoria, where mice were subjected to traumatic brain injury concurrently with strangulation, who supposedly research the impact of that dual severity in human survivors, looking to see if it could find indicators of human brain injury. We had very clear objections to this based on really the inability to replicate a psychological and intensely human experience, and trying to use animals to replicate that scenario, what would otherwise be a violent crime, and saying that you can create a humane model was very strongly objectionable to us and to most people, I would believe. But we had also severe issues about the anesthetic that they use in the analgesia, the animal welfare implications, the waste of money. It was at $1.6 million of taxpayer money used for this research, and the lack of translation to human patients for a number of reasons, really not creating what the scenario would be in humans at all. If you haven't taken action, we do have an action on our website. You can write directly to the AEC on that. So now turning to the question, are we making progress? We have seen some recent advances in what is quite a slow-moving field, as in most areas of animal welfare, unfortunately. But we did see last year in New South Wales prohibitions on the forced swim test and smoke exposure. Thanks to the Animal Justice Party for raising that amendment to Animal Research Act. So those particular tests, if you're not familiar with them, the force swim test is a test to, again, supposedly assess the effectiveness of antidepressants by the amount of time it takes for a rat to struggle giving up swimming in a beaker, and the smoke exposure is subjecting mice to cigarette smoke to replicate conditions associated with smoking. So both those tests have been, or the most extreme form of the smoke exposure and the force swim test have been prohibited in New South Wales legislation, and the National Health and Medical Research Council has also put some prohibitions in place in terms of funding. So that was some progress. We've also seen funding allocation in New South Wales, both in terms of rehoming groups that are rehoming animals and used in research and setting up a non-animal technologies network. And a similar WA medical research inquiry has made a recommendation that there's an investment in non-animal research methods. So we will be following up on that. CSIRO, their kind of consultancy arm, did release a report in 2023 that was really highlighting the economic advantages to Australia in non-animal research models, particularly for drug development. So we've been heavily advocating for those recommendations to be adopted, because it's great to have the report. We don't want it just sitting there and going nowhere. The FDA Modernisation Act relates to an amendment to legislation in the US. So the FDA equivalent to the TGA here removed the mandate that animals need to be used in safety testing of drugs. The guidelines that sit under that are still haven't removed animals. So there is an effort underway at the moment for the introduce another act which will speed the process of amending those guidelines that fit under the Modernisation Act. But that definitely has implications in trying to advocate for clarity in Australia by the TGA. We've also seen kind of in the biotech sector more events and symposia which are focusing on non-animal research methods. So that's definitely part of the pathway in recognising that there's an issue and that animal models are not the gold standard. And I'd say at a public level, we're seeing increased engagement, and we really saw that with that recent example. Obviously, that's a particularly hideous example, but in terms of actions taken in a short period of time, was one of the highest that we've seen. So turning to what you can do, there's a QR code here that will take you to our What You Can Do page on our website, and there's a range of different steps that we suggest that you can take. Some of these I've listed here. So in terms of informing yourself, attending our events, we're a national organisation, so a lot of our events are online. We will have supporter webinars and we'll have different speakers on a range of issues ranging from kind of non-animal methods to ethics to legislation. We also encourage supporters to buy cruelty-free, so whether that's household products or cosmetics. We recommend the cruelty-free International Leaping Bunny scheme. There's a symbol there that you can look out for. If you're making a donation to a charity or someone's approaching you about sponsorship for something, really be wary that you're not donating against your knowledge to animal research, because a lot of the health charities will use animals or fund animals as part of their research. So we have a humane charities list, and you can use that to ensure that your donations are not funding animal research. Should you be inclined, you can participate in human research studies. It's not all invasive. Sometimes it's just completing a questionnaire, and we do have some information about how you can do that on our website. A little bit morbid, but there is the option to donate your body to science, would be to a university, because sometimes they can extract information from autopsies in place of using animals, for example. More pleasant one, the option to adopt or foster an animal. Again, we have a web page about that linked to on our What You Can Do webpage. The most well-known groups are Beagle Freedom Australia and Liberty Foundation, but judging from the allocation of funding for the right to release rehoming grants in New South Wales, it does seem like Animal Welfare League and I think Bankstown Animal Shelter were also recipients. So I assume that they will be doing rehoming of animals from research as well. And one of the important things I would say is to stay informed, so you can talk about this subject to your own network. We have an e-news you can subscribe to, which comes out once a year on our website. We have a podcast as well, and our social media, and definitely share anything that you find particularly engaging or interesting to your networks. We also have particular actions that are related to our campaigns. So I talked about our primate campaign. We also have campaigns that say no to dissection, the transparency in research campaign, campaigns on the forced swim test and nose-only smoke exposure, and the right to release campaign. So you can find particular actions for those on our campaign web pages. And our case studies will often have an action directed to the research institution that approved the research. We'll provide an analysis of why we thought that research was particularly unjustified, if it was particularly invasive or replicated existing knowledge, could have been done in another way. We'll have a template email that you can send. Other options you can take is to become a member. If you become a member, that means that you can vote for who's on our committee or nominate to be in our committee. So just go a little step extra. We also have symbolic animal membership. So if you have a companion animal, they can become a member as well. And finally, there's also always welcome to fundraise or donate on our behalf. So with that, I'll say thank you so much for listening. It was a bit of a quick run through, but I hope it gave you a bit of an update on what we're up to and the challenges are and how you can help.
Rachel, thank you for a really inspiring presentation. The chat box is reflective of that. And again, I thank Cara for providing links to assist with your presentation. And yeah, I just admire you so much, you and your colleagues. I think that you have to stare at and read about some of the most horrific cruelties ever perpetrated on our fellow species. And I admire you more than I can say for being willing to do that. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we do have a very supportive team, so grateful for that. Thank you.